Happy 2021, everybody. Anybody glad to see 2020 gone? Anybody? There's way more people that listen. Hang on a sec. That's like the third or fourth time that we've tried to get some kind of participation going, and it's not happening. So we're just going to deal with that right here and right now. The best part about having a microphone is that I can just like wait. Anybody glad to see 2020 gone? That's better. There were still a lot of you that did not participate, and I'm just disappointed in you. Your New Year's resolution should be participate more. I would not have participated if I were out there, so I can say that from here. So I wanted to start out today a little bit lighthearted. I Googled funny 2020, like goodbye 2020 memes. You should not Google that. Some of them are bad, but a lot of them are real funny. So I pulled a few of the not bad ones and just, thought we'd have fun. I've unfortunately driven cars a lot like that last one. I like this one if 2020 were a slide. For some of you, you aren't sure what that is. That's a cheese grater. You grate cheese. Yeah, they're very sharp. Another slide one, interestingly. I don't know about you. I think that looks fun, personally. Next. Is anybody a fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Because that reminds me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Okay, moving on. And this is my favorite. So, 2020 was crazy. I know for a lot of people, 2020 was legitimately one of, if not the hardest year you've ever had in your life. And so it's a new year. It's a new year, but it's a new year that like isn't that much different already from the old year. I actually also compiled a list of some different things that happened in 2020 because it was a wild year. In January of 2020, Kobe died, which that was heartbreaking for me. I'll just have you know. I followed the NBA very closely in the mid-90s, back when it was good. And I remember Kobe when he was drafted and all the hype around him, and it was really sad. Kobe died. For the third time in our nation's history, a sitting president was impeached. And Meghan Markle and Prince Harry left the royal family. Does anybody remember that? That was in 2020. That feels like it was about 9 years ago, doesn't it? Then it was just all the racial unrest last year. There were murder hornets. Remember murder hornets? That was a thing. We had all the West Coast wildfires, and there were a bunch of really famous celebrities that died, like Chadwick Boseman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Trebek. It's a terrible year. And that doesn't even mention COVID-19. And all of the craziness around COVID-19, all of the world being turned up on end, and this new normal, and was it 15 days to stop the spread? Whoops. I'm bad at time management. That's real bad time management. And on top of all this external stuff, for a lot of people, I've talked to so many of you guys over the last year and realized that it's not just all that stuff that happened that made it like a crazy and terrible year. It was all because of COVID. It was like the isolation and the loneliness. It really messed with people. I know that when the quarantine first started, like back in March, things were a little dicey around our house for a few weeks. We were figuring out how to homeschool kids, one of which hates school, so that's fun. One of whom likes school, but also likes to be mouthy more than school. And it was tense. It was hard. I don't know how it was for you guys. Maybe your family, it was great and it was blissful. I remember seeing people talking about how if you're a parent, make sure that this season, this is it's like extended Christmas break, and make it so much fun for your kids so that they think, man, that was the best time of our life. And I remember thinking, you don't have kids. Clearly. I would love to do that, but I can't. Because we all want to kill each other pretty much all the time. And there's no end in sight. It was a crazy year. So today and for the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to push the reset button. And I want to help us turn the page on what for many of us was our worst year we've ever had and step into this new year, even though not everything is different, right? Because, I mean, many of you are still wearing masks. There's still a lot of quarantining happening. We just had there were 4 or 5, I don't know how many families that are a part of our church that were quarantining during the Christmas break time. And they're most of them are back. It's good to see all you guys back from COVID quarantine. It's been crazy. And so I want us just to kind of pause to reset. And I want to give us a picture of maybe what can be. Because I think that 2021 can be one of our best years ever, even if not everything changes. But it's all about the way we approach it. Ultimately, I believe that joy, peace, satisfaction, contentment in life has very, very, very little to do with the circumstances around us. And it has a whole lot to do with the transformative work of the Holy Spirit inside us. And so if I can maybe give you some tools, if we can maybe take a step back from all the madness and go, okay, we're in a new year, let's get some new things off the ground. And if everything's not going to be different, what can we do to maybe take our focus off all the things around us, to focus on what God is doing inside us, so that no matter what happens this year, we can still have a great year. So what I want to do is I want to start today by talking about what I think is the most, and this has been something, to be honest, this is something that God's been stirring in my heart for several months now. And I think that if there were one singular thing that I could have every person in this room do, just one thing, I think it would be this, what I'm going to talk to you about today. I think this is the most critical thing that we can do if 2021 is going to be even just a better year. I believe that it can turn out to be one of your best years that you've ever had if we'll take this seriously today. So, we're going to look at a letter written by a man named Paul. Now, if you're not real familiar with the Bible, Paul was a Christian who lived just after Jesus. And Paul had kind of a special mission from God. His job was to take the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, from the Jews to the Gentiles. So Paul was a missionary. And Paul is probably the greatest missionary that's ever lived. He would go around to all these towns in Asia Minor and in Israel and up into Southern Europe. And he would just tell people about Jesus. They had never heard of this guy before. He would tell people about Jesus, about the good news of this man who came to take away the sin of the world, who paid a price we couldn't pay, and he died on the cross and he was raised from the dead. And he defeated the power of sin off our lives once and for all, and you can have new life in him. He would go around and he would tell people about this. In every city he went to, man, people would respond, and they would respond, and people would give their lives to Jesus, and then he'd start these little churches. And they were a mess. They were all a complete mess because they had no background. They didn't know how to live. And so he would plant these churches and he'd kind of get them established, and he'd put some leadership in place, and then he'd go on to a new city and he'd plant a new church. And then over time, he'd write letters back. And so most of the New Testament, like the second part of our Bible, a lot of it are letters that Paul wrote to these churches, giving them instructions, being like, that's dumb, don't do that. That's better, do that. And so there's this one letter in particular he wrote to the church in Ephesus. Now, Ephesus was a major port and trade city in what is today Turkey. And it was a city that was tremendously important. It was very pagan in a literal sense, like there weren't Christians there. There just weren't. It was a highly religious city, but with Roman gods. And Paul writes this letter to the church in Ephesus, giving them a lot of instruction. They were very new to this. They didn't know how to behave. They didn't know how to act. They didn't know how to follow Jesus, but they wanted to. So it's a letter full of instruction, and it's talking a lot about be unified with one another. Frankly, it's a lot about diversity. Hey, you're not all going to look the same. You're not all going to talk the same. You're going to come from very different backgrounds, and you don't all have to end up looking the same and talking the same. It's good that you're different. You have one thing that unifies you: Jesus. faith in Jesus Christ. And so let that be the thing that matters the most. And that's kind of the whole theme throughout this letter. Then he gets to the very end of the letter. Now, beginnings and ends are interesting because beginnings and ends usually are the most important things people say, right? I mean, if you're gonna give instructions to your kids, to somebody you care about, you want the last thing, like, remember this thing, do this thing. If you forget the rest, okay, we'll deal with that, but like, if you do this thing. And at the very end of his letter, Paul says something that is so significant. I'm just going to read it for you. He says, a final word, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you'll be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. Now look at what Paul says next. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then, after the battle, you will still be standing firm. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power, so that you can stand against attack. Right? Any of you, we're going to practice participation again. Do I have any Mandalorian fans? Anybody Mandalorian? I love Mandalorian. It's so good. Some of you are like, I'm out. This guy likes Star Wars. I'm done. It's okay. That's fine. It's fine. I have a few nerd things that I like. That's okay. Not very many, but a few. A few. Stop it. A few. Love the Mandalorian. If you're familiar with the Mandalorian has kind of a superpower. It's his armor. His Beskar armor can stop like anything. I'm watching it with my older two kids, actually with all my kids. And we just got through the episode. I'm not going to remember the girl's name because, like I said, kind of a nerd. But where they met the Jedi, where he took the child to meet the Jedi. And at the very beginning, when they're fighting, she goes to slice him with a lightsaber, and he puts up his Beskar, and like lightsabers cut everything, but it doesn't cut the Beskar. It's his superpower. It's armor that enables him, no matter what comes his way, to stand. He might get knocked down, but he can stand in the end. What Paul is saying here is so simple, but it's so immensely profound. And frankly, it's so different from the way we live our lives day in and day out. And so, man, if there's just one thing that I want you to understand or know from the last year and going into this year, it would be this: that the best year always happens when we win the war in the spiritual. Like this is everything. I'm going to repeat some of what Paul wrote. We are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Now, maybe when I read that, you're kind of like, oh man, this is weird. I don't know how I feel about this. That's fine. I want you to know I'm preaching a little bit differently than I usually do. Like, I don't talk a ton about this stuff. I'm a little bit more pragmatic in my faith. I'm not always like the devil. But he's real. And what we tend to do as people, this is why I said God's been stirring this in my heart for some time. As I've talked to people over the last year, I hear people talk about circumstances. But the problem is those circumstances aren't your enemy. And if every one of those circumstances changed, there's just going to be new circumstances. There's always new circumstances. Always. The reality is that the fight that we are in this life, and when I say fight, like each of our fights looks a little bit different. But the fight that we're in this life, whatever it is that beats you down, that defeats you, whatever it is that you can't seem to get beyond, whatever it is that locks you up, at its core, you can deal with that thing all you want to, but something else will just come and replace it. Because everything fundamentally is a spiritual battle. Everything. And so in the midst of like this crazy world that we've had over the last year, I've heard circumstance, and I've heard very few people talk about the fact that what they see is how our spiritual enemy is trying to ruin everyone's life. Now, does that mean he caused COVID-19? No, that's not what I'm saying. But he's certainly trying to use it. Do you think for 1 second, there's all this stuff about Satan in the Bible. The Bible describes Satan as the father of lies. It describes him as a roaring lion prowling around seeking whom he may devour. I've used this metaphor so many times, but it's the best one. If you like animal nature documentaries, you know how a lion hunts, right? A pack of lions. They don't hunt a pack. They try to isolate an animal from a pack. Because in isolation, you're vulnerable. But in a pack, you're strong. All of the craziness that's happened in the last year and all of the precautions and all the things. Listen, I'm not trying to make any kind of a commentary on what's right or wrong or the best way to do things. We've tried really hard here at City North to give people options. If you want to come and be around people, you can come and be around people. If you want a distance, you can come in distance. Whatever it is. Because ultimately for me, what was really critical is that we gave people an opportunity to make a choice for what they needed in this season of their lives. To not isolate. Because in isolation, you can be defeated. And if you think for 1 second that Satan didn't use all of this COVID-19 stuff to isolate people further than we already are, you're crazy. There's a reason that like teenage mental health, depression and anxiety rates are through the roof. Because we weren't made to live in isolation. We weren't. And Satan has been working overtime in the last year. Whether he caused, I have no idea. But I know that when all this stuff happened, he was like, oh, buddy, here we go. I can really mess with people now. So if you see the pandemic as the problem, well, great, we're waiting on a vaccine. But if you see Satan as the problem, then you realize vaccine or not, he's going to come back with something different anyway. The best year always happens when we win the war in the spiritual. When we win, like there is a battle for your soul. And I don't know how you feel about that. I promise I won't talk about that all that much over the next year. But there's a very real battle for your soul. A very real battle. And Satan is using everything he possibly can come up with to get you to isolate, to get you to live in just total fear, to get you to stay stuck where you are. What Paul is saying ultimately in this passage is that nothing in this physical world is actually our enemy. Nothing. Nothing in this physical world is actually our enemy. Now that's a really, really hard thing, particularly maybe if you're in a season of life where you're really wounded by someone or you've really experienced a lot of pain. What I don't want you to hear is that means that person's good. That's not what I'm saying. But they're not the enemy. Like, if you lose a job, your boss is not the enemy. If you go through like a divorce, your spouse is not the enemy. If a friend stabs you in the back, that friend is not the enemy. You cannot like them anymore. But they're not the enemy. If the whole world goes crazier than it did in 2020, none of it's the enemy. None of it. But our actual enemy will do everything he can to convince you that those things are your enemy so that you keep fighting the wrong enemy, which means you'll never win. Like, do you see that? What Satan will do, the father of lies, what he'll do is he'll tell you through people who are not Christians, he'll tell you through media, he'll tell you through culture, he'll tell you through everybody around you. He'll tell you, hey, that's the enemy, that's the enemy, that's the enemy, that's the enemy. We just came out of an election season. Oh my goodness. At least there's not an election in 2021. They're the enemy, they're the enemy, they're the enemy, they're the enemy, they're the enemy. Whichever side you're on, the other side's the enemy. No, they're not. But as long as Satan can keep convincing us that other people, other things, circumstances in life are the enemy, we'll keep fighting those things and we'll never win. Because there's always another thing. So Satan's job is to convince you that physical things are the enemy, the reality around us, that it's the enemy. So we'll spend all of our time, all of our energy, all of our effort on those things, which means we don't start with the war in the spiritual and we stay stuck. Now, Paul continues what he just said, and he gives some instructions on what this armor that we're supposed to put on looks like. Because, one of the problems with the Bible sometimes is Paul's like, hey, put on the full armor of God. What's that mean? I don't even have regular armor. Not carrying it around at home. What's the armor of God? Well, Paul tells us. He says, stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth and the body armor of God's righteousness. And some of you already are like, wait, time out though. Still doesn't make sense. That's all right, I'll get to it. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news so that you will be fully prepared. In addition to all of these, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. Put on salvation as your helmet and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Cool. Got it. Still don't know what it means. Still don't know how to do it. Not real stuff, right? Well, Paul finishes this out by telling us how we access this armor. All these different things. Obviously, this is not real armor. Paul is, it's all metaphor here. Spiritual warfare. So how do we put on the armor of God? How do we put on the armor of God? Paul says, pray in the Spirit at all times and on every occasion. Stay alert and be persistent in your prayers for all believers everywhere. For Paul, the beginning and ending point for spiritual warfare is prayer. It is prayer. It is the armor of God brought about in your life through prayer. That is how you win the war in the spiritual. And if you're going to have a great 2021, a great 2022, a great 2023, however many years you have left on this earth, it begins and it ends with winning the war in the spiritual. And winning the war in the spiritual begins and ends for Paul with prayer. See, we win the war in the spiritual by covering everything we do in our lives in prayer. It's not our last resort when we've exhausted all of our other options. It's not the thing we do when we don't know where else to turn. It is. It's part of our everyday, day in and day out lifestyle. So that when the enemy attacks, it's already there. All that armor, it's already present. See, the thing about it is that if you begin to develop a good, vibrant, strong prayer life, all of a sudden those fiery arrows from the enemy, they don't hit the same way. They don't pierce the same way. They might still hurt, but they hurt differently. The pain gets smaller because your perspective is bigger. Everything for Paul is about spiritual warfare and about prayer. Now, there's kind of an internal joke at City North, so if you're new, I'm going to let you in a little bit. We do a lot here with spiritual gifts and personality profiles and things like that. I think that the way God wires us is tremendously important in us figuring out what God created us to do. And so we do some of these different things. I'm gonna be real vulnerable with you guys. One of my lowest scoring spiritual gifts always is prayer. I'm bad at prayer. Okay, bad. It's we've got my friend Gene, who's been playing guitar with us. Almost every band practice we have, he's like, "Hey, can we pray?" Yeah, we can do that. We should probably do that because this is like worship rehearsal. Yeah, I forgot though, so thanks for reminding me. It's not one of my spiritual gifts, at all. I have other spiritual gifts that are very spiritual, but prayer isn't one of them. So if you're sitting there okay, cool, but I've tried to pray and I just don't get it, I'm with you, you're my people. I'm very forgetful. I am diagnosed severe ADHD. Medicine helps, but it doesn't fix it. And so praying is tough for me, man. It's really, 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 really hard. And there's been a lot of times in my life that I felt a lot of guilt because it's when somebody reminds me hey, we should probably pray right now because this is a spiritual thing. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. I probably should have remembered that because I'm the pastor and stuff. But I didn't. So I know how difficult this can be. And so, because of that, I've created some things to help us. Like, maybe you're here and you're like, oh, I'm a great prayer. Good, I wish I had your gift. Maybe you won't need any help. But for most of us, what I've learned is that most people struggle a lot with prayer. We don't know how. Like, the most we were ever taught was like whatever version of a pre-meal prayer you learned. Like, it's about all some people have. And so I want to give you something very specific that you can do coming out of this message. And that is commit to being a part of 21 days of prayer. That's what you can do. Like, it's one thing to know and understand that the best year always happens when we win the war in the spiritual, and that winning the war in the spiritual happens when our prayer life is strong. But it's a whole other thing to know how to do that. And so 2 times every year, in January and in August, we have a 21 days of prayer session as a church. We order that very specifically. In January, it's like New Year resolutions, all that. Like, let's get started on the right foot. In August, we do it as well, because if you have kids, that's like back to school time. And it's, again, kind of like let's kind of ramp things back up. We're coming out of the summer, get kind of all our ducks in a row again. It's kind of organized time. So we do 2 sessions of 21 days of prayer. We do 21 days because if you know much about psychology, you know that there's a lot of research showing that 21 days in a row of a thing it can become a habit. If you're my people, you know that no number of days in your entire life make anything become a habit. And that's okay. But we're going to try. So 21 days. Here's what we do. I want to give you a picture of what this can be for you and how you can be a part of it. And then what I want you to do is just kind of choose how to be a part of it, okay? Every January and August, we do this. And what we do is, actually, the first step for you, if you want to be a part of 21 Days of Prayer, the very first step is to go to prayer.citynorth.church. Prayer.citynorth. That is on your message notes. It's on the back in like 4 places. It's on the back in like 4 places, because I know everybody's going to forget. That's okay. Prayer.citynorth.church. On that website, there's a place, if you scroll down, you can sign up for information and texts about 21 Days of Prayer. Do that. I mean, we're not going to spam you. It's literally just going to be for 21 Days of Prayer. That's it. We'll send you a couple of texts a day. One early in the morning that's like for the day, it's like a prayer target, like a specific thing to pray for. And we cover the gamut of like government and leaders at the federal, state, local levels, our church, other churches, we cover a lot of different things in the 21 days. We'll give you like a prayer target for the day and like a scripture that you can kind of meditate on, and like there's a link, and it's really simple. Doesn't matter if you've never done this before. I promise you can do it. So that's the most important thing. The second thing that you need to choose is like how you want to be a part of this. So during 21 Days of Prayer, we have live prayer services every day. In our building, we are open from 6 to 6:30 a.m., which is a struggle. It's a struggle. But I'm here every day. I got to unlock the building. 6 to 6:30 a.m. every day. We have a 30-minute prayer service. Now some of you are like, I can't pray for 30 seconds. So 30 minutes, I'm out. No, I promise. If you will trust me, I can pray the whole time, and I've already, and frankly, probably listening to me talk, you're like, oh yeah, I can see why you might struggle with prayer a bit. So I can pray for the entire prayer service. And if I can do it, you can too. I promise. There's some things that we do, like we turn on music really loud, because what I do is I walk the room and I pray out loud. Here's the best tip I have. However it is that you talk on this thing, pray like that. So I can't sit still and talk on the phone. It's a real problem. I have to walk. And so I get up and I pace, and I just walk through. I just loop the room, and I talk out loud like I'm talking to somebody standing next to me. When I began doing that, it completely unlocked prayer for me. Like, totally unlocked it. Because I can talk forever. It's not a problem. I just can't think forever. And so we do some things. We try to create an environment that's conducive to if you want to sit, if you want to stand, if you want to kneel, if you want to walk, if you want to try praying out loud. Maybe it's something you've never tried, but you're like, I don't want anybody to listen in because it's going to sound dumb. No, it's not. Also, we'll turn the music up so nobody will listen in. So 6 to 6:30 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday in this building. Saturdays, prayer service is from 8 to 8:30. Sundays is from 9 to 9:30. Every day during 21 Days of Prayer. 6 to 6:30, Monday through Friday. Saturdays at 8, Sundays at 9. Saturdays and Sundays, we have childcare available if you would like to come, but you've got kids and you don't have anybody to watch them. We've got childcare. Monday through Friday, it's a little tougher to get people to show up for childcare, so we don't have it. That's okay. If you're able, I would love to have you come be a part of 21 Days of Prayer Live. There is something that is very powerful and that is very different about people praying together in the same physical space. It's just different. But I also know that for many of you, that's like, maybe you're new and you're like, I don't even know you yet, man. I'm not showing up. That's fine. Or maybe you're like, I do know you and I'm not showing up. That's also fine. We will be live streaming our prayer services. We've just gotten into live streaming, so hopefully no technical issues, but we'll be live streaming our prayer services every morning. If you sign up for the text list, we will text you a link every morning so that you can just jump onto the live stream from 6 to 6:30 or 8 to 8:30, 9 to 9:30, whichever time it is. And then we'll be putting that particular day's prayer service on our website after that. Again, if you sign up for the text list, we'll get you all this information. I don't expect you to remember it. So you can be a part of the prayer service anytime during the day you want. So, like, you got options here. Here's the other thing. Maybe some of you are going, I'm never going to remember. We got these handy-dandy little guys. I had a team member ask me this morning, is this like for people who already had COVID? Because we have the green, the yellow, and the red. That's not it. Sorry if that was a bad joke. This wristband, it's simply on one side says pray first. That's it. And there are wristbands at both of the tables as you exit the auditorium today and out in the lobby at the Next Steps booth. Grab one. We got tons. We're not going to run out. Put it on your wrist. For some of you, that's going to be super annoying, and that's kind of the point. Leave it on during the 21 days, and when you notice it, pray. Even if all that is, God, I don't know how to pray, but I'm trying. If that's all it is, great. Start there. God, I want to pray, but I don't know how. Cool. God's big enough for that prayer. He'll listen. He'll honor it. Grab a wristband. The other thing that we have at the tables is a book. I love this book. This is almost entirely copied from another church that obviously gave permission. It's a pray first book. There's some spaces in the back to like kind of write your prayers. If you're like a journaling type of person, there's some spaces in here for that. There's also 3 or 4 different prayers that are like written out and you can walk through. Because if like you don't know what to say, if you don't know what to do, it can be very overwhelming trying to pray. And I know that. And so we have tons of these books. They're 100% free. Take them. If you know you're going to lose them, take 3. That's fine. I can't tell you how many of these dumb books I have, like in my house, here at the building, they're everywhere because I lose them. So I grab another one. Take a prayer book with you today. We have physical copies here. We'll also have digital versions online at prayer.citynorth.church. Those will be online later today. Take a prayer book with you today. And if you're going to be a part of 21 Days of Prayer in your home, like use this. It's a tremendous resource. Like massively huge, awesome, amazing resource. Take it and use it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So use it. So I want to challenge you to commit to being a part of 21 Days of Prayer. And if you're here and you're like, man, I didn't like this service, I'm never coming back. That's fine. You can still do 21 Days of Prayer from your house when it has nothing to do with us. We'll send you prayer targets and you can just pray. Whether you like it here or not, this is not about us. It's not about you coming to our building. It's about you winning the war in the spiritual by going to war in prayer. Whether that's here with us at another church, it doesn't matter. So I want to challenge you to commit to whatever it looks like for you, for your family, if you have a family, to being a part of 21 Days of Prayer. If you have kids, by the way, invite them into this process somehow. I don't know what that looks like for you, but invite them into the process. I want to challenge you to do that. So head to prayer.citynorth.church. Feel free to do that now if you're like, well, I don't want to be rude. That's fine. I don't care. You can be rude. That's all right. Go ahead and do that now if you want. If you're going to forget, I don't care. But I want you to sign up so we can send you some prayer targets, so we can grab a wristband so you can be reminded and spend the next 21 days, maybe for some of you, doing something that you've never done before like this. I mean, what's the worst thing that happens? You get to the end of the 21 days and you're like, well, that was a waste. The best thing that happens The best thing that happens is that God, through the power of the Holy Spirit inside you, begins to transform your heart in ways that you didn't even know were possible. He begins to transform the way you think. In Romans, Paul writes, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Some of us need some mind renewing right now. But the thing is, you can't do that on your own. The Holy Spirit can. And He will, if you'll win the war in the spiritual. So, choose to be a part of 21 days and go to war in the spiritual, and God will change you. He'll give you power you didn't even know possible. And I want to close today with just a very small picture of what that will look like if you will win the war in the spiritual. Again, Paul wrote this in 2 Corinthians. He says, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. And this is the picture that I want you to have. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. For some of us, there are some strongholds in our lives, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that we've never been able to move beyond. Maybe there are mountains that we're facing right now that we don't know what to do with. And we're afraid they're going to be things we carry with us for the rest of our lives. There is a war that if you'll fight it, and if you'll do it God's way, He'll give you the power to demolish those strongholds from your life. And the next 21 days could be the beginning of that. They can be. There's no magic sauce. There's no bean to eat. It's a simple matter of understanding that the battle we face, the war we fight, is a war in the spiritual, and we have to win there. And that war is fought through prayer. So my hope this year is that no matter what is in your life, whatever it is that may have made 2020 the worst year, that you'll start to do the war not here in the physical, but that you'll begin to do war in the spiritual against your true enemy. And that as you do, you'll be able to look back on these next 21 days and on 2021 as a time period that changed everything for you, as a time when chains were broken off your life and strongholds were demolished, because that's what God does. Let's pray.